Joe. Um, there's really two parts to the LC cell. There's the normal, if you like, application where
Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed. I think we had completed that last question, Clark. We have. Question? Ask him. Ask the clerk. Ask him. The House determines its business.
Mr. Speaker? Oh, you want to move it?
The elected member for East End to ask the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development. Question number 40.
Mr. Speaker,
member for Newlands.
I would like to request that the next two questions for the member from East End be moved to the order paper for the next sitting. I'd like to move a motion asking the House for leave to do that.
The question is that leave be given for questions 40 and 41 to be moved to the next day's business in the absence of the member from East End. All in favor? Those against? I understood that you had seconded it. Question 42 then, Ms. Zena.
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Deputy Governor. Question number 42.
The member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask question number 42, standing in my name to the Honourable Deputy Governor. Could the Honourable Deputy Governor please state how many prison officers are currently charged with criminal offences and what is the nature of those offences?
Honourable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the answer. Currently, there are 2 male prison officers who have been charged with criminal offences. One has been charged with rape, and the other has been charged with 2 offenses arising out of the same incident: assault, occasional actual bodily harm, and 2, making a threat to kill.
Thank you.
From Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess it is safe to assume that those 2 officers are no longer on active duty.
Member for the Honourable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, do allow me a bit of lenience so that I can answer the question fully. Mr. Speaker, members will recall that members of the House did raise concerns about the number of civil servants who were on required leave for extended periods of time. We took that on board, and I have instructed chief officers to ensure that suspension from duty on full pay or required leave is taken as a last resort, and that appointing officers should look at the risk to the organization of the person remaining on duty before a decision is taken to put the person on required leave. So in accordance with that policy, one of the officers charged with rape has been suspended. The other officer who has the other 2 charges remains on duty. I understand that he is one of 2 persons who are certified to train prison officers in control and restraint techniques, which is absolutely vital to their performance and their safety, and he remains on duty. We expect that the case will be heard by the end of this month. Obviously, if he's convicted, then there will be action taken.
Member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the sensitivities, but I have to ask the questions. officer that remains on duty is connected to the first individual through whatever investigation is going on, right? Is that what you said?
Member, the Deputy Governor.
No, Mr. Speaker, there are two separate incidents. One officer was charged with rape. He remains at home. He was suspended. The other officer that was charged with lesser offenses remains on duty. The offenses, yes, were of the same incident.
The member from Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honorable the Deputy Governor say if do you have a similar circumstances in any other department in the civil service?
Deputy Governor.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. We have 3,900 civil servants. So I'm aware that there are a number of civil servants who are before the court, some who have been suspended, some who have not, so some who are under investigation. It's very, very difficult for me to say, give you any specific information. However, I want to reiterate, the policy is this. If a civil servant is arrested or is charged, the appointing officer is required to take a judgment call as to whether they should remain in the organization, maybe move to a different role before a decision is taken to suspend.
The member from Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the Deputy Governor's difficulty, and I'm willing to accept it in writing at another time. But just one more follow-up question, which is, can you state whether the two men are Caymanian or not?
Honorable Deputy Governor.
No, sir. I don't have that information.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure about the process. It's still 2 years, but he don't have the information, fine. Is he going to provide it another time? The question needs to be answered still.
Honorable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, if the member had asked me for a question, I would be, to be put in writing, I'd be happy to do it, but he didn't.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Honorable Deputy Governor to provide the information in writing at a later date?
Mr. Speaker, happy to do so.
The member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just going back to the individual that is still on active duty, although under some restriction, and on the presumption that there's no guilt until proven. Aren't the accusations, though, serious enough that for someone acting in the role of a prison officer, that they should not be on active duty around prisoners, people who were trying to rehabilitate and so on, until they're cleared, hopefully?
Member from, sorry, the Honorable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the appointing officer, the prison director, who is best placed to make that call, made a judgment call that there was no risk to the organization, and as a result, the person remains on duty. I am not in a position to second guess that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will just say this, the reason why I'm asking this question is that there are concerns, and I won't say any more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Deputy Governor, question number 43.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honourable Deputy Governor please say how much money is the Cayman Islands government paying to accommodate 2 Caymanian prisoners in the United Kingdom?
The Honourable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the answer. In 2018, the Cayman Islands government paid Cayman dollars $103,134.92 to accommodate 2 Caymanian prisoners in the United Kingdom.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honorable Deputy Governor say if there's any intentions of bringing back home those 2 prisoners to be held within our own prisons?
The Honorable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, those persons were removed from the Cayman Islands on grounds of national security. I'm very hesitant to discuss this here. The Standing Orders 22F2 does talk about questions that deal with secrets, so I'm very hesitant to continue this discussion, sir.
I think we'll pass from that one. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the Governor's statement, but I would like to find out not the reasons as to why they were taken off. Actually, I have the documents here as to why they were taken from Cayman, but is the country's citizens at any risk as a result of why they left the Cayman Islands?
Honorable Member, I think we need to leave the matter as is, and perhaps you can have a chat with the Honorable Deputy Governor. You have already said you have some documents, so you're much more knowledgeable than me then. I don't know anything about it. But I would say that you have a discussion with the Deputy Governor as he has explained.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I crave your indulgence to try to move on to another area that hasn't nothing directly to do with
Supplementary
asking
question,
the question.
yes.
Yes.
Still, you
Yes.
can still have the supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is there any planned improvements to the prison to solidify security for the prison?
I don't know that could be answered in a supplementary question like that, Honorable Member. It is going far afield from where you were, unless you're tying the two together somehow. And if you're tying the two together somehow, it might go into the area that the government don't want to go in.
Exactly.
All right. So
Which creates difficulty for me too, Mr. Speaker. Last supplementary question, I think. The 2 Caymanian gentlemen who are being housed in the United Kingdom, are any of their human rights being violated as a result of their removal from the Cayman Islands?
Honorable the Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that a challenge on human rights grounds had been made by the 2 prisoners. That matter is currently before the courts in the UK.
Sub judice matter arises. We move on.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honorable Attorney General. Question number 44.
A member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Turning to something more positive now. Can the Honorable Attorney General say if Advisory District Council's law from 2011 is currently enforced?
Honorable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sorry. The answer, Mr. Speaker, this law was assented to on February 1st, 2011, pursuant to Section 119 of the Cayman Islands Constitution Order, which provides that which provide that, subject to this Constitution, a law enacted by the legislature shall provide for the establishment, functions, and jurisdiction of councils for each electoral district to operate as advisory bodies to the elected members of the Legislative Assembly. The law is currently not in force, and a commencement order will be required to do so pursuant to Section 1, subsection 2 thereof. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, that when the law was promulgated, the elections law then in force provided for 6 electoral districts. That law, that is the elections law, was subsequently amended in 2016 to create 19 single-member voting districts. Accordingly, the Advisory District Council's law will have to be amended to reflect this change to the electoral law and the number of electoral districts in Cayman Islands before it is brought into force. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through you, can the Honorable Attorney General say if there's any availabilities through any other law to members of the Legislative Assembly to raise funding to do things for their communities, which was provided in this law but is now not enforced?
The Honorable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, maybe you could explain that to me, because this sort of sounded a little bit different from what we're treating with here.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, if you will allow, as a representative of this House, it is my job to try to find funding to do things in my community, unlike the members of the government who has the public purse and can use that to do things. The honorable members on this side, Mr. Speaker, don't have access to the public purse. So we have to rely on our salaries. So,
Mr. Speaker, I really hate to interrupt, but the member is suggesting something that is completely untrue. Members on this side have no access to the public purse to take money and do anything for any district except through the lawful process which we are about to start in Finance Committee.
Honorable member, you might want to.
I apologize, and I take back what I said. I didn't mean it to suggest that they're doing something inappropriate within government, but if there is things that they see needed to be done across the country, period, they can find the provisions through the necessary appropriations. What I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, is that outside of those that are not limited to us here on the opposition side, we have no legal way to raise funds in our community outside of that law that the Attorney General had just said is not enacted. I am asking him, is he aware of any other law that legally allows members of the Legislative Assembly to raise funds for us to do things in our community?
The Honorable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker.
Tell him it's the law.
Mr. Speaker, I of course, Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm trying to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, trying to be helpful as possible to the honourable member. I'm looking at the law. Just take a quick read of it, and the only reference I see in here to funding, as far as this law is concerned, is apparent. I'll just double check. Is in section 6, which speaks about the fund available for the purpose of enabling the council to perform their functions. Under this law shall consist of such sums as may be provided for purposes in the estimates of revenue and expenditure of the islands for the purpose and approved by the Legislative Assembly, in such years as the LA may, and the recommendation of the minister responsible for finance, choose to do so. The council may receive as donations, funds that the council may receive as donations, and the council may raise through community and other activities. Is that what you were? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, I am not aware of any other law, maybe apart from the, assuming that they form a not-for-profit organization, which they can use once it's registered to raise funds by way of sort of maybe charitable donations or something. I'm not aware of any other legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And through you, that's exactly what I expected the Honorable Attorney General to say. Because I read the law myself, Mr. Speaker. So, is there any conflict with a member of the Legislative Assembly having, or a member of the Legislative Assembly being connected to a nonprofit and being on that nonprofit because he's trying or she's trying to raise funds for their constituencies? Is there any conflict? Because I need to know when I'm out begging for money how this legally goes before somebody says some funny business with money. The law just enacted a couple of weeks ago in respect to the nonprofits. I would hate to be called out to say that we're accepting monies from persons, because that's the normal process to go out and beg for it, but it has to be accounted for in any solicitation of funding according to the new law.
The Honorable Attorney General.
I'm trying to wade through what he's getting at, but and I genuinely want to be helpful as possible. But I'm assuming that if you're a member of the council, I'm assuming that each non-profit organization would have a constitution that sets up their governance structure, and those are the people, the officers and members would be the people who are make the decision, Mr. Speaker, as to how to raise funds and where they would seek to raise those funds from. So if the member is honorable member sits on those governance, sort of, I need to be very careful with my words here, but assuming that the honorable member is part of that governance structure, then clearly it would be that sort of decision for that organization to determine, Mr. Speaker, who should play certainly what role. I don't think I can go any further than that. So, but it's difficult for me to say whether he would be conflicted as a member, given that I wouldn't know all the circumstances at all. So.
Mr. Speaker, I think we recognize the confusion, because I'm just as much confused as the Attorney General. I'll say this one last thing. No, I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I think he recognized the difficulty that I'm in, is what I'm saying. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to put it like this. If Kenneth Bryan goes out to the public now and say, I need to raise $2,000 to fix Miss X's home, and I go to the community and raise it, will I be breaking any laws if it's not attached to any organization at the moment?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid, much as I would like to be helpful, I don't think that's an advice I can offer to him in these kind of circumstances. I wouldn't be able to do that at all. So he would have to take advice elsewhere before doing so.
Mr. Speaker?
The member for Georgetown Central.
I don't think I can go much further, but what I'm trying to get at was hopefully a solution to what I am trying to do. But it seems that we as legislators must now recognize that there's no way for us to go out and formally ask for money without the potential chance of somebody saying you're doing it illegally. And we've heard much about the nonprofit legislation that is now enacted, and that I don't want to be a legislator who is being questioned about audits and accountability for money. And I don't know how to deal with this problem, but I also need to help my constituents to do things in their community. So I was hoping that the Attorney General would offer a solution, but there seems to be none, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to be very helpful to the member.
This is the last supplementary on this.
Yeah, no, I don't mind talking. I'm trying to be as helpful to the member as possible, but I'm assuming that if you have an NPO, Mr. Speaker, if you have an NPO, a non-profit organization, they would have meetings, they would decide how they're going to raise funds and who is going to do what and from where. It's difficult for me to sit here in the abstract. It's difficult for me to stand here in the abstract to tell him that if he goes about raising funds in a particular way, that would be permissible. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, but if the honourable member want to have a chat with me or have a meeting with me separately, I'll be happy to sit down with him and have it and discuss and advise as best as I could whether if he tried to raise it a particular way or his NPO tried to raise it a particular way, whether that would be within the spirit of the law. That's all I can say.
I think that's what ascertain if it's within that law.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask Honourable Attorney General. Question number 45.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Attorney General state if it is possible for members of the Legislative Assembly to amend the Constitution without a referendum, and if not, can he advise how, and if they can he advise how the amendment can be made?
The member, the Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the answer, the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009 makes no provision for its amendment by the legislature, save as provided in sections 44(2) and 60, subsection 2, whereby the number of elected members of the Legislative Assembly may be increased. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, any other constitutional change would have to be effected by an order in council made pursuant to the same powers used for the order in council providing for the Constitution, namely sections 5 and 7 of the West Indies Act of 1962. As to the procedure to be followed, an order in council amending the Constitution would be recommended to Her Majesty in draft by the UK ministers. The order in council will be formally made by Her Majesty with the advice of her Privy Council. Usually, Mr. Speaker, the practice has been for there to be agreement on the text of the proposed amendment following negotiations between representatives of the UK and the islands respectively. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this was the process followed for the 2016 amendment to the Constitution in relation to the retirement age for members of the judiciary. There is no requirement in the Constitution itself for a referendum in which a majority of the electorate publicly approves of a proposed change to the Constitution. However, during the constitutional modernization process, the government proposed that any further changes to the Constitution should not be made without the authorization of a referendum, save for minor or uncontroversial changes. While the UK government approved of this proposal in principle for substantial constitutional changes, it noted that there may be exceptional circumstances where it would not be possible or appropriate to require further changes to be made only where supported by the people of the islands in a referendum. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, a referendum may not be required in every case where changes to the Constitution are proposed. This will depend on the nature and significance of the proposed changes. However, depending on the nature and significance of the amendment proposed, the UK government may therefore wish to have evidence of popular acceptance in the islands of the agreed change. Thank you.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the answer to the question I'm asking is somewhere in that last paragraph, but not as very clear. And I don't ask this question only for myself, but for everybody else who's listening. But can the Attorney General say who decides what is minor and uncontroversial?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Honourable Member. Usually, Mr. Speaker, is a matter for the Honourable Premier and the Leader of the Opposition, and of course they would canvass members of this House depending on the nature of it, and certainly the Governor's input would be sought as well. And if the Governor is satisfied that it is minor and that there is consensus, say, between two sides, then the submission will put up to the Minister, who would then, of course, make their own judgment as to whether it's minor, and if it is, then they'll give a proof for it. Huh? Yeah, that's right.
The member from Georgetown Central.
Thank you. So ultimately, the last call would not be with us, but with the UK government.
That's correct.
Attorney General.
That's correct, That's correct, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the business of the House on today's order paper having been concluded, except for the necessity of this House to resolve itself into Finance Committee to consider the supplementary appropriations referred to in the Minister of Finance's paper, which he presented to the House this morning. I move the adjournment of this Honourable House until the conclusion of that Finance Committee.
The question is that the Honourable House to stand adjourned until adjourn to go to Finance Committee, and will resume at the end of Finance Committee, to put it simply. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The Honourable House to stand adjourned until Finance Committee rises.
I'd like to call this meeting of Finance Committee to order. I call upon the member from Savannah to lead us in prayer, as is our custom.
Let's bow our heads. All-powerful, most wonderful Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come into your holy presence at this special meeting of our Finance Committee. We ask for your guidance and interventions at the appropriate time as we discuss the finances of these islands. We ask that you be with our chairman and those that assist him. I ask that you bless my colleagues for the tumultuous time that we've been through for the last few days. Lead us, guide us, guard us, and protect us. Give us health and protection from above. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. We do have a quorum, and so the committee can commence its meeting and proceed to do its business. The quorum of Finance Committee is 10 members, excluding myself, the chairman of the committee. The purpose of this meeting of Finance Committee is to consider the items shown on the hard copy of material that has been distributed to all honorable members and was tabled in the House earlier today. The committee's approval for these supplementary expenditures is being sought under Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Law. Such a procedure, honorable members will recall, was last done in September 2018. Given that government would very much like to conclude the Finance Committee's proceedings today, I ask for members' usual cooperation in asking their questions promptly and not making long introductory preambles or remarks before stating their questions. Very simply, please ask your question. When it comes to taking a vote on the individual items on the Finance Committee agenda, I shall ask for a member's position on a particular item by posing the question. All those in favor of, and I shall state the name of the particular appropriation and its amount, being approved pursuant to Section 12(2) of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye, and those against, no. Honorable members of the committee will quite rightly ask, what are the financial impact of these requests? Honorable members, taking into account the supplementary expenditure requests now before the committee, it is expected that there will be a substantial operating surplus of approximately $67 million for central government for the current financial year that will end on the 31st of December 2019. Cash balances of approximately $300 million are expected, and this will be after paying off government's bond obligations that matures in November 2019, and such a level of cash balances that will provide 150 days of expenditure coverage, which would be substantially in excess of the framework for fiscal responsibility required minimum of 90 days, and a net debt ratio that is anticipated to be substantially under the ceiling of 80%. Honorable members, I can say that none of the FFR ratios that government must satisfy are in danger of being non-compliant because of any approval of the supplementary expenditure requests by the committee. We will now consider the first item on the agenda that requires consideration by the committee. In particular, we are going to begin with page 7 of the document that you have before us, and we will deal with output groups to be purchased by the Minister of Human Resources, Immigration, and Community Affairs. Human Resources and Immigration. Before we actually begin the questions, open it up for questions, I would ask the Honourable Premier if he would like to make any sort of statement before we start. No, sir? So let us commence then with page 7 and HCA 5, Border Control Services. Additional item funding sought of $610,000. $610,000. Are there any questions? There are no questions. Member for East End?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, can the minister tell us what it is, Mr. Chairman? I'm wondering how that transition has gone and what has caused this to come up by so much.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask which transition? The one relating to border control?
Yes, yes.
The combination of customs and immigration?
That's correct, yes. But, and was there not monies allocated for that already? Is this because of that split?
Well, overall, the transition has gone remarkably well. We are talking about an increase of $610,000 in a budget that was originally 4.8 million. So while material, it's not an outrageous increase. We can provide the committee with details of how that increase or what constitutes that increase.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I should have reworded that, maybe. But is it what was trying to drive at was, is it because of this split now that we see an increase in offenders or catching offenders? Because that's what it's about, really.
So Mr. Chairman, throughout the paper, we will see some significant increases for many of the entities which have any interface at all with the anti-money laundering, counter financing of terrorism issues. The government is committed to spend many millions of dollars, quite frankly, over the course of this year in bolstering that regime. And the vast majority of this increase here for border control is relating to that. I mean, we can go into more detail if the member or the committee wishes, but generally that's what that money is about. Increase in staff, increase in systems, in training.
As a result of the split?
No, as a result of the necessity for us to significantly improve our anti-money laundering, counter financing of terrorism regime. I think the member and the committee generally will know that we have gotten quite an unfavorable report from the implementation perspective from the CFATF, which was confirmed by the FATF in February. And so we are working right across the full range of of entities and agencies which are required to have those systems in place to improve them. We have been placed, the Cayman has been placed in what's called an observation period. We have 1 year to get our systems up to what is considered satisfactory standard. If we don't do so within that time, we will be moved from observation status to a gray list. And then it gets worse after that. So we are spending and committed to spend many millions of dollars over this year to address that or those issues.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the explanation by the Premier. Why I ask these questions is because the description says it's the enforcement under the Immigration Law 2015, which has been repealed. So I just...
Yeah, it should be the Immigration Transition Law 2018.
Right, because we did that last year.
And the Customs and Border Control.
And the Customs and Border.
2018.
Right. So that's why I was asking about this, you see. I mean, I understand it's not minuscule, but it's not that significant an increase. But
we can provide some more detail, and it might be helpful because, as I say, we're going to encounter this sort of thing, I think, right through the document.
But you see, I wasn't connecting this financing of terrorism and proliferation of AML, CFT.
Yeah, you wouldn't be expected to, Minister, without.
Yeah, you can't connect the two of those.
I'll provide a little more information, just getting the CFO here. So, Mr. Chairman, through you, so this amount comprises funding for an increase in compliance officers, an increase in to fund increase in operating costs, generally relating to the whole CFATF concerns, additional training.
Other questions? Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to say congratulations to the government for their commitment to making sure that we stay off of any kind of negative list, and have my full support and any necessary appropriations and support for it. My question is not related to that, though. Can the minister say that if Border Control Services will be responsible for the enforcement of finding violators to the labor law on the ground as opposed to around the border? Forgive me for any confusion, but because of the split, I just want to know who is now responsible for surveying the lay of the land of immigration violations as a matter of a labor violation of immigration.
So, Mr. Chairman, we have the Department of Workforce, and we still have the Department of Labor and Pensions. So work would be responsible for like work permit violations, DLP for labor violations.
So I don't expect to see any border control officers dealing with any construction sites, so to speak.
Unless there's, a major joint operation, but not in the usual run of things, no.
Member for East End.
Just ask the minister, the premier really, where is that task force situated now? Under what department? Labor and Pension? The task force that used to be under immigration for the enforcement of immigration rules, law.
That'd be under work.
Under work still.
Mr. Chairman, just so I can, we are in the process of, just for clarity, because members will ask down the road, the Ministry of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs will shortly be renamed simply the Ministry of Employment and Border Control. But there's no other changes to it, just name change, because it's simpler. And more accurately reflects what the ministry has responsibility for. Unfortunately, even all these years, hence, most people still wonder what human resources means in the context of the ministry. So it'll be simply employment and border control.
Mr. Chair, through you, what then will happen to the reference to the community affairs part?
It's the Ministry of Community Affairs. That's a separate ministry with a separate chief officer.
Member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to information systems within what is now the Immigration Department, are enough funds being allocated to improving that database that is used to track all information, work permit information?
We no longer have an immigration department, so it's border control.
Well, yes.
Or work. Right. So, can I ask the question again?
Same question, but in relation to
I've forgotten the question now.
The information system. I've had difficulty getting FOIs answered and so on because they're not able to produce reports. The system has been, I've been told the system is inadequate, it can't be queried properly. Is there any funding going into improving the information systems, the database that's used within that entity?
How much is it? Mr. Chairman, there's $1.5 million in the existing budget for that, and we're actually work on building the system is actually on the way.
All those in favor of HCA 5, Border Control Services, for $610,000, being approved pursuant to Section 12.2 of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Next, HCA 14, Protection and Investigative Services, for $1,988,000. Are there any questions? All those in favor? Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably better I go first because he's going to ask a lot of questions. Can the Honourable Minister say explain the arrangement between the Cayman Islands and the UK in respect to the purchasing of this new helicopter? Is it a 50-50 ratio in respect to purchasing of the new helicopter? And also, can we get an update as to when the damaged helicopter will be back in operation?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I don't have the actual agreement with me. This is a matter of public record. We made an announcement. We held a press conference about it. But essentially, it is a 75. If the member is still interested, it's a 75, 25%, 75%, 25% arrangement. The UK has put in 25% of the purchase cost, or we do have the agreement here. We have an MOU between the UK and its overseas territory, the Cayman Islands, to agree on the capital, running costs, and other inputs to establish and operate a regional helicopter capability. So that their purpose in kicking in the 25% of both capital and operational costs for, I think it's 5 years initially, in terms of the operational costs, is so that the overseas territories in the Caribbean will have access to this kind of coverage that a helicopter provides. I think everyone has been so impressed by what we were able to do with the now sadly damaged helicopter to assist other overseas territories during 2017 when they went through the hurricanes, that the UK has been prepared to go down this route. So the money here, which amounts to almost $2 million in increase, is to assist principally with the operational costs of the new helicopter. The helicopter that's damaged has been quite seriously damaged, much more seriously than initial sort of inspection showed. And it is not a new craft. It's 21 years old, I believe now. And so we are awaiting the insurance views about it and as to what the next steps are. But the government has committed one way or another to have an additional aircraft. If it is not that one, then a replacement one. We don't want to go back to just having one, because anytime for whatever reason that is not operational, you know, there is a deficit in our surveillance and rescue capability.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Chairman. Yeah.
Member for Northside.
Just is any of this money earmarked for recruitment and training of Caymanians to fly the helicopter? Because we don't want to get in the situation we were with the last one, that the Caymanian couldn't qualify.
Mr. Chairman, we have one Caymanian pilot currently away that's being trained, but that's funded separately from this money, because he's been overseas now.
Yeah, but can I encourage the Premier to try and recruit a few more Caymanians who have an interest in helicopter training? I think there may be more than one that is currently doing it.
I think that's wise advice, wise counsel. It's something we're already considering, because with two craft, obviously you need more than just two pilots. People have to have time off. All sorts of things happen. So definitely that's part of the overall plan.
Member for East End.
Thank
you.
You,
question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if the Premier can tell us if that consideration on that commitment to have two crafts, and now that this one is damaged, they're in consideration of to maintain that commitment of getting a new one, another new one.
Mr. Chair, that would be my preference. Absolutely. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we want to hear what the insurance company says and what we get back. There are two numbers that have been thrown around for the actual cost of the current one, but I believe the 11.5 million is US, is it? Yes. Is US. So we're talking about 9 million. So we'll see. I mean, the beautiful thing about getting a new craft is that your maintenance costs, you know, are so low for the first few years of its operation that when you get a craft that is old as the one that we had, although she's given incredible service, you know, you immediately start with significant maintenance costs. So the government will see how that goes, and we look at our finances. But certainly, I speak for myself really only because we haven't discussed this in cabinet. I would prefer if the current craft is written off, that we make the stretch and buy another new craft.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
because the current one is the new one is, I think, five or six what do you call those things? Yeah, generations. Newer than the one that we've been flying. So.
Mr. Chairman, let me once again, because this all started way back when by me, let me once again give my commitment to this country and the government to support the purchase of a new aircraft, because helicopter that is, of another one, because there comes a time in any piece of equipment that it becomes diminishing returns. And that is the point that's at. New Orleans started that off for us, and that was our failure of not doing it at that time. Do you remember when we had to put it down there that I think the rotor something was cracked and we had to take it out 500,000 or something, 200,000-300,000, whatever. And we couldn't put the rescue equipment on it, which we thought we could have retrofit. So I want to give my unconditional support to purchasing a new aircraft for $9 million. If it saves one life, if it's worth it. But the question I would like to ask is this new one now fitted out for 2 pilots?
Mr. Chairman, I really don't want to go out on a limb, but I am fairly certain that she's got dual controls. This is a really state-of-the-art piece of, to use the English expression, piece of kit. So,
well, that's good, because then we may not.
And it is capable of carrying 10. You know, it's quite a big craft.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if such is the case, then we soon won't have the need to send people overseas to train. They can train right here as co-pilots and then work their way up over the years, whatever that is, as long as they get sufficient time. But certainly that will take much longer than sending them overseas, because they fly every day overseas, as opposed to, and for long periods as well. So are we saying that the increased cost of operation is only $2 million for this year? This 1.98, well, if you want to call it 2, you call it 2.
Mr. Chairman, I am so advised.
that is providing we have two, I'm assuming. Oh, that is if we're going to have two. Am I right?
Yes, because this amount related to the new aircraft. But of course, if the other aircraft isn't flying, there are no operational costs involved in that.
Right. So, right.
Yeah.
This was done before.
Over and above, yeah.
Before the other one got damaged.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understood. Thanks.
All those in favor of HCA 14, protection and investigative services for $1,988,000 being approved pursuant to Section 12.2 of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Members, please turn now to page 8, and we'll deal with equity investment, EI 11, Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, for $7,865,000. Are there any questions?
What does this entail?
Mr. Chairman, this entails the purchase of a building if the offer from government is accepted to provide accommodations for the Royal Cayman Islands Police headquarters. The reason I'm not being more specific about which building is because there's an offer on the table and it's at that sensitive point.
So you don't want to say which building?
Right.
Okay, that's fine.
But it is in central Georgetown. I'll go down.
Okay. Now, here is where I'm at, Mr. Chairman, and I want to see the deputy over here. I went to the police station recently and had to go into the old lockup cell, which is used for exhibit, I think, as a holding exhibit. Mr. Chairman, I must say to the Premier, since he has responsibility for the police department, that just the budget, no, I don't mean operational, but certainly this relates to operation, but the condition of the operations. We need to do something with that. Did money in here to do something with that? Because that's the worst place for any human being to occupy. The same way it was bad for prisoners, it's even worse now because the people in there are there all the time now.
So, Mr. Chairman, before I answer that, I just want to make certain the 7 point that I haven't misled the House or the committee. The 7.865 is not entirely for the purchase of the building. In that amount is some. Make sure I say the right thing now. All right. But all of this, right? Right. 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 So it is about $2.5 million, about $1.5 million for the RCIPS office fit out for the new digital forensic hub and upgrade of a database and vehicles and equipment. As well as the fit out for the new work department.
Mr. Chairman, can I impress upon the Premier to at the very least, give, obviously the operations of the police is going to stay where it's at. You just make more space there if you get the other building for smoother and more efficient operation by moving people over to that other building wherever that is. And I guess those out of the Elizabethan Square as well. But it is imperative that we do something with that exhibit area. I believe it is safe. It's a safe lockup. And it's secured. But the conditions inside there is deplorable. And we cannot expect human beings to occupy that area. I don't even believe the air content in there is good based on what I was seeing and feeling and smelling. So I would implore the Premier to act expeditiously to try and get this straightened out.
Mr. Chairman, I wish to thank the member. I am not aware, have not been made aware of those sort of specifics, but I do know, we all know that there are great challenges with space and with the quality of the accommodation at the current Central Police Station. Obviously, well, the member himself knows because the issue's been around from even before we were in cabinet together in 2005 of the desire for a new police headquarters. But there are so many demands for infrastructure improvements across government that what we have been trying to do is to find more I don't want to say prudent, but prudent ways of meeting these challenges. In other words, instead of $170 million for a new courthouse, we purchased the Scotiabank building, which will help, and then we'll hopefully be able to phase the rest of it. And we're taking a similar approach to the needs of the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service in terms of accommodation. Obviously, the kind of numbers we're talking about for a building are, we could not even begin to think about building a new facility for that kind of money. So I believe if we get this purchase and we're able to outfit it to meet the requirements of the service, we'll free up some space. There'll be a greater opportunity and greater ease in improving the current facilities to address the concerns the member raised about the exhibit room and so forth, as well as other things. I don't know the specifics about it, but I know generally that things are not well in terms of accommodation, and haven't been for many a year over there.
Mr. Chairman, the Premier is quite correct, because I took that upon my shoulder when I became a minister early in my tenure, and did a lot of renovations and painting all the police stations and paving the parking lots throughout the country. And by part of that plan was to move the licensing department, which eased up for them to put some section over there, which I have no business with. But behind that police station, it is cramped. There are no parking on the road into the, and they're parking on the lawn of the old glass house behind there, and I went there for a specific reason and was escorted in there, and the place is not paved. All where the mechanical rooms are, it's not good. It's in a serious a deplorable state of disrepair, and we need to do that. We really need to do that. We can't expect to ask our people to work and we don't give them the tools, and in particular, it is police I'm talking about. We don't need them to have excuses that the reason they're not enforcing the laws is because they don't have the tools. So I just implored whatever can be done there around that exhibit area, it needs to be done now. And I know the chances are any one of us going there is very slim, other than I had to go there for a specific purpose. And that's the only reason why I was exposed to it.
Thank you. Member for Northside.
Yeah.
Member for Northside.
Yeah, just to the Premier and to the other people here. In what used to be the exit from the old inspection building, the police have some barriers up there. If you would just move them into the parking lot 3 feet, because where you have them, they force people to walk on the road because you're blocking the sidewalk. And I saw somebody almost got knocked down there one day this week. So if you could just push them back in so that they're on the inside line of the sidewalk, so people can still have the sidewalk to walk.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I've noted that myself, and as the member from East End has just said, off mic,
just fill the sidewalk.
We should just fill it in with proper sidewalk.
That's a better solution.
There's no ingress or egress there anymore.
But
agreed.
Member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Honourable Premier, I noticed that a portion of the funds he indicated was for upgrades to the computer system. Can you tell me when was the last time the computer system was upgraded?
I'm not aware, Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid, and neither is anyone around me. So it must have been a long time ago.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked that question is that back in 2014, the police had lost 1.2 terabytes of data, which was roughly 80 million pieces of paper. And what we want to make sure, well, what I'm trying to understand is that over the last 5 years, nothing has been done to fix that problem to make sure it didn't happen again, because 80 million pieces of paper is a lot of paper for the police to lose.
There are no further questions?
No.
All you have to do is signal. I recognize you, sir. Go ahead. Please ask your question.
I think we're waiting on the answer, Mr. Chair.
Fair. My apologies.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, could I ask the Chief Officer to answer this rather than him having to tell me and I have to process it and then repeat it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Wesley Howell, Chief Officer for Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration. Mr. Chairman, I can share that the computer hardware, that is the servers and the storage, has been upgraded over the last 3 years. In addition to that, the police are using a different technology for their police incident management system. It's an off-the-shelf solution, also being shared with 911 and the prison service, so it's almost a one-stop shop in relation to tracking those incidents. That is proceeding, as well as we have some additional work coming along for content management, which will help going forward with the storage of electronic evidence, images and videos and those sorts of things. But the issues that occurred with the loss of the data are no longer an issue because that hardware has been replaced.
So just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Was that information ever recovered or it was just completely lost?
Mr. Chairman, I can't recall if all of the information was recovered. I know that the Computer Services Department went to great lengths to recover large portions of it, but I can't say for any certainty that it was all recovered.
Just one final question on this issue. Just in terms of the database and the computer upgrade, in terms of encryption and like, you know, hardware, encryption of our hardware and protecting our hardware. I mean, are we making sure that we're getting the best of the best? Because we need to ensure that what happened with losing 80 million pieces of paper equivalent is something that never happened again. And a lot of people still are curious as to what information was missing or lost, because 1.2 terabytes is a lot of information.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. One of the bits of area that we're spending considerable amount of time on is record management in relation to keeping singular images of data. So as part of what happened previously, we would have multiple copies of the data in different locations, so they weren't all unique pieces of information, as well as ensuring that we have adequate and properly tested backup solutions. So that was all part of the work that we've done since that incident to ensure that we minimize the risk of that happening in the future.
Mr. Chairman.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Honourable Minister spoke about some of the funding going to office fit-out costs. Can the Minister say if any of those, that cost is going to go to the record room for the Immigration Department or the, I'm not sure if they're called work or which one is dealing with it now. Is it, I think the one by the airport, by the post office there, that deals with all the permanent residences and all that. But I had the opportunity to see the record room where paperwork is just stacked on top of each other in a room that was not fitted out for that purpose. Yeah. And heard of stories of instances where the stacks had fallen and then everything was disorganized for a long time, making it rather difficult to find records. I think the Chief also may know what I'm speaking of. So I'm asking, is any of this money available for fit out and proper record keeping for that department?
Mr. Chairman, I can take that one as well. We're not spending capital money on fitting out space to store paper records, but I am happy to say that we are building the software systems to be able to store digital versions of the records going forward. So the future state of the work IT systems would mean that documents, even documents that are coming in on paper, would be scanned, and those originals would go back with the owners of those. Persons who are able to upload their documents would be able to do that ahead of time. So we will not be storing paper documents going forward. The plan for the existing documents is to move them into an electronic content management system by scanning and cataloging them and then disposing of the paper as we go forward. So the plan isn't to spend more money storing paper, but it is to actually reduce and remove the need for paper altogether.
Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of tie together the last two questions, do we have a data management policy in place now with regards to how data is accessed, who accesses it, how you manage it? You get a piece of paper, what do you do with it, that sort of stuff. So at the end of the day, everyone knows what they should be doing, and who monitors that?
Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent question. So we are working very closely with the Office of the Ombudsman in relation to the data protection legislation coming into effect. And we can say that we are in the process of developing that policy, the governance documents around how we store and secure information. But the net effect of what we're doing is actually reviewing every single thing that we do in relation to what we're asking individuals for. So we won't be in a situation where we're storing or asking for information that we don't need to make a decision, and we're not keeping it for any longer than we need it to make a decision. So from the outset, we're going to reduce, absolutely, sir, we're going to reduce what we're asking for, and then what we do ask for, we're only going to keep it for as long as we need to. And then what we do keep, we're going to secure around a tight policy on data storage in compliance with the data protection regime.
Member for for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to hear government has reached Management 101. Do not ask for information if you don't need it. In my 18 years here, and in particular after Ivan, I've heard the same story, the same pronouncement that we're going paperless. I know the chief officer's former life was in that arena. Why is it taking so long to reach that point where everything is scanned and disposal is made of that which has been scanned and stored off-site? I'm sure you remember how many times we discussed this 10, 15 years ago. Why is it taking so long? Is it equipment? Is it...
Mr. Chairman, two answers there. One is that there's a cultural desire for folks to work with paper, which we're actively working. I said that with tongue in cheek, sir. But it is a real issue for us because some individuals and some boards prefer to have the actual paper, not the scanned version. So we are working with them to bring them around. The other part is we have so much paper that the cost of scanning that ranges into the millions and takes years to do. So one of the things that we're having to do is to decide on strategies of how we actually work backwards. So going forward is not an issue. We have many government departments that have eliminated paper now. Recently saw somebody go through their their annual returns with the general registry, and that was done without submitting any paper to them. They've moved completely online, but they still have all these historical documents that require, and that can range into the millions. So part of it is the mechanics of changing the culture, and then the other bit is just the cost and time that it takes to go backwards to scan and have it as accessible in electronic form as it would be in paper form.
But, Mr. Chairman, isn't this an opportunity which has been discussed here for many years to hire the college students over holidays to scan these files? And because nowadays everybody but a few of us know about computers and scanning and filing and the likes, is this not a perfect opportunity now for us to start hiring some kids, school goers, school children, or in college, whatever, to do this on a yearly basis, and so we'll get away from that and try to get a little paradigm shift started.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's a viable option. We also have the opportunity, for example, if one would think about an immigration file record, so we would have multiple police records over multiple years that we could have the opportunity to dispose of through formal means, duplicates of things that we have on file. So we're only scanning one version and the latest version, and not everything that's contained in the paper. So we have several approaches to moving forward. But with my background, I can't see it happen fast enough. But it is something that we're making good progress on, sir.
Now that we're on the police matters, and you just push that door open again, we have talked for many years about putting a system throughout Cayman on that fiber optic line, which would communicate to police cars with the computers. I don't know, I know it's a very costly exercise, but certainly one won't fill baskets. And as we buy new cars, for years that's what we have been talking about. You know, put a an internet service on the fiber optic and with repeaters and the likes throughout the country, and slowly migrate into it. And that has never been started, has it?
Mr. Chairman, the connectivity of technology within law enforcement cars, not particularly police, but also Customs and Border Control and work officers, is something that we look forward to starting. The wireless technology from the providers is of sufficient speed now that we can have the connectivity there at reasonable pricing. The bit that we're working on is the securing of those connections, but we are making some progress towards that and hope to be launching some pilots before the end of the year to have that connectivity in the cars.
Man, I love to talk to people like this young man because he's saying he knows more than I do about this thing called connectivity and internet. What I know about it, you can write on the back of a 5-cent stamp and still have a place to lick your tongue. But I want to know which provider he's talking about. If we're looking for a new one or what? Because the ones that are here, there is no connectivity, not to my phone at least. And if you can find it, if you, they here yet? Okay, all right, I will. He doesn't have to answer.
All those in favor of EI 11, Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, $7,865,000 being approved pursuant to Section 12(2) of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Members, we're going to turn now back to page 4, and we'll pick up now with output groups from the Cabinet Office. Let's turn our attention now to CBO1, Development and Coordination of Government Policy for $226,663. Are there any questions? Member for East End.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm rather curious as to this secondment to off-reg.
Is there a question in there, sir?
Mr. Chairman,
I would like to think that I'm curious. I need to know what about.
I would prefer if you just state a question for me.
Can someone explain
what are you curious about?
This secondment to off-reg?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, the secondment is because he was formerly Chief Officer in the Ministry of Education. So that's the secondment. It's a substantive post, Chief Operating Officer. Yeah. No, Kristen Saku. Kristen Saku.
Yeah, Kristen. I'm comfortable. I thought it was a professional from overseas or something, because here's a lot of secondment from out of that northern shore, that island in the north.
All those in favor of CBO1, Development and Coordination of Government Policy for $226,633, being approved pursuant to Section 12(2) of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. CBO2, Cabinet and National Security Council Support and Servicing for $84,417. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, all those in favor of CBO2, Cabinet and National Security Council support and servicing for $84,417 being approved pursuant to Section 12.2 of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. CBO 11, Freedom of Information and Data Protection Coordination, $150,000. Are there any questions? All those in favor of CBO 11, Freedom of Information and Data Protection Coordination for $150,000 being approved pursuant to Section 12.2 of the Public Management and Finance Law, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. CBO 17, Information Services Provided to Other Government Agencies, $400,000. Are there any questions? Member for Buddentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, just for my own understanding, what ultimately is the goal of CIG, the end goal in terms of CIG TV? Because one of the things I am concerned about is that some of the other cable providers who are supposed to be providing local content isn't doing so. And I'm wondering if they're being pushed or encouraged to carry CIG TV as part of their local content. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, all of the television, the local television, carry CIG TV except Flow, who have now agreed to carry it as well. So they'll assume doing that service as well shortly.
I just want to understand if those local providers carrying CIG TV, will that be used to satisfy the requirement for local content?
Partially, I don't think it's enough to meet the requirement, but in part, yes.
Member Freestad. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, has there been a rewrite of those licenses to allow that?
Mr. Chairman, the licenses, the terms of the licenses have been updated to include the CIG component as well as other local information, sports, and so forth, and news.
Can this finance committee have a copy of one of those, or of all of those as it relates to the provider?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I don't think we have them here, but we can certainly make them available.
That's fine as long as they're made available. Now, Mr. Chairman, I would like to go ahead for a minute at CIG TV. When is this going to be made free? Is the CIG TV broadcast going to be made free for the country? Broadcast for free.
Can I just ask you to please state your name?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask, I'm not sure what position you hold. Acting CEO of OFREG, because we're getting into the technical area now, and I just have to be back and forth, and this is not my forte at all.
Please proceed.
Alifa Amoy, Acting CEO OFREG. If I understand the member's question correctly about the over-the-air broadcast of CIG TV, we're one of the few countries that have not yet moved from the old analog over-the-air broadcast to a new digital standard. One of the reasons for that has been the cost of changing out all these transmitters, and also the fact that a lot of folks who still receive over-the-air signals don't have the capability of receiving the digital version. Over time, what is happening is that more people are replacing their older TVs with newer ones that right now have the ability to receive both the analog version and the digital version of signals. Eventually, TVs won't be made that can receive the analog version of these signals. To my understanding, and I can't speak for CIG TV because they're actually a licensee of ours, but as I understand it, more of their viewers are watching their signal through cable TV providers who take the signal from CIG TV and put it onto their cable networks than are actually receiving it over the air directly. The second issue is that SIG TV actually has a dedicated YouTube channel that also gets quite a lot of viewership as well. So my understanding, and again, I can't speak on their behalf, but my understanding is that they reach quite a large audience using those two delivery mechanisms right now, and they wouldn't be looking to replace. In fact, it would be almost impossible for them to replace their analog transmitter with a replacement because nobody makes analog transmitters anymore. It's an obsolete technology that's been supplanted by the digital version of broadcasting standards. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No. And it's not for you, it's a policy decision.
I will admit.
I want to know when we're going to put it out for free. CIG TV is not free, and it's a PBS. It's a public broadcasting system station, whichever you wish to describe it. It is being paid for by the public funds, and it must be made free, whether it is analog or digital. Every person in this country has to pay someone to receive what they're paying for already.
How are they paying for it already?
They gotta go through the cable company. They're paying for it. All the monies we spend, shooting this, shooting the different things at the different functions, we're paying for that. They're paying for that, and then they have to pay somebody to see it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm totally confused. Where and how is the public paying for CIG TV? Where was it ever described that government was putting this out for free? Government charges for a whole range of services that it provides. Government provides very few services free. So I don't know where we get to the conclusion that government is under some obligation now to ensure that CIG TV is received free.
Okay.
How do we get there?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a problem with that. The logical question then is, do we charge the providers for it?
Mr. Chairman, it's the converse we're after. We've been trying forever since we started this to get more local content broadcast by these television stations. So now we're going to charge them to provide the service? What is it we're trying to do? What is the overall objective? The overall objective from the government standpoint is to be able to disseminate as much local content to the general public, who by and large are already paying one or other of the TV providers for the ability to receive other programming. But we're piggybacking CIGTV on that.
So, Mr. Chairman, and maybe the Premier doesn't see it the way I do. Let me explain how I literally see CIGTV, and everyone else does. I have to subscribe to a provider to be able to see it. They're getting it free. And Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr. Chairman, they're not getting it free. They are providing a service that we want provided to the general public using their platform. Otherwise, government will have to develop its own platform, and they have to find money to do that, and somehow or other it's got to get paid for.
Okay, understood, and I don't have too much problems with that, Mr. Premier. Now, what happened to the others? To the other people who don't subscribe, can they put a little antenna up and pick up a service in this country which is a public broadcasting service by virtue of putting a little antenna out there and not have to subscribe? That's all I want.
Mr. Chairman, we're now in an area that I can talk about policy, but I have no technical expertise in. But what I gathered from what Mr. Oyog said was that this is old technology that not only is no longer available generally, but that there is no replacement for, unless we want as a government to spend whatever it is required. I have no idea what that number is, to be able to create a platform ourselves to be able to broadcast.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I don't think the Premier understood entirely how this works. Because you can pick it up by virtue of it being digital too. So, but because we don't have a dedicated transmitter, which is free, we have to go through the subscriber.
Mr. Chairman,
therein lies our problem.
As I understand it, there is a transmitter. There are 4 actual TV stations licensed in Cayman: SIG 20 on Channel 20, UHF, Channel 24, Channel 27, and Channel 21.
Right.
Some of them are stronger than others, depending on where on the island you live.
Agreed.
But the best way, the best clarity you have of receiving them is when you get the signal directly from the source on your cable network, or if it's available on YouTube.
I don't want to hear about, with all due respect, I don't want to hear about 21, I don't want to hear about 24, I don't want to hear about 27, and I don't want to hear about 23 or whatever it is. 28. 2 in front of an 8, 28.
Mr. Chairman, there is a possibility for the government to transition any of their stations to digital format. Unfortunately, it would require that customers out there who don't have a TV capable of receiving the digital format would have to receive a box that would convert it for them. The study in terms of how many people that would involve needs to be done. The study of how that technically could be done. As the regulator, we would be happy to facilitate the licenses required and provide the spectrum for it, but it would need to be a policy decision and a cost allocated to make it happen.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to be disrespectful to Mr. Ali. These things called studies got to stop now. A study of how much it got to be, matters not to me, or how many people are going to subscribe. The same way those, that 27, that 21, I think it is the Christian one, people are now and can put an antenna up outside their house and pick them up, depending on where you are. There is a signal strength problem. If you're next to the station down in Georgetown, you probably blow your TV up. If you're in East End, it's a little dim in certain places. The same way that is done is what Channel 28 must do, which is CIG TV. Because those who do not subscribe and are entitled to see what everyone else sees on the public broadcasting station, they can't afford it for whatever reason, or they don't subscribe to the other ones, they are entitled to it also. Since the Premier has said that we are using them as the medium to get it out, FREE, then the others who are getting their 21 and 27 FREE needs to get 28 FREE.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I notice a part of this vote for the funds that we're approving here relates to content for CIG TV. And what I'm trying to understand is that the TV providers have a responsibility to provide free local content. And if it's a situation now that the government is actually using public funds to generate free local content, then the question is, when do we expect, or do we expect a portion of this cost to be borne by the people who should have been incurring this cost to begin with? What we don't want is we're using public funds for something that they should be paying for. Because if that's the case, we shouldn't be voting for this money. And they have a responsibility to pay for the content since they're not doing it as required by their license. So the question is this now, in all of that, is the content that they're getting for CIG TV that we're paying for using public funds that they should have been providing, are we reimbursing that, or are we getting something back from them for it? Because they have a responsibility as per their license to actually do this.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the member for Bodden Town West is looking at this from a completely different perspective than I am. Government has a real need to be able to effectively disseminate its information, news about what it is doing, about policies, about a whole range of things that happens in government. So these TV stations are actually providing government with a service for which we would otherwise have to pay by one means or another. So I hear what he's saying about local content, but I think it is at least quid pro quo that we get this information disseminated. The CIG TV produced information and programming, that we get that disseminated fairly widely, certainly across Grand Cayman, less so obviously in the BRAC, but which is a problem. But without them, government would have to create its own platform to do so.
Mr. Chairman, I completely understand where the Premier is coming from. Thus the reason I asked the question first. Are they using this as part of their requirement for local TV content? Because if the government is doing this out of their own goodness, it means then that the licensees still have the requirement to provide local content. And what we don't want is, in essence, for the government to be doing this and they're getting off scot-free. They still have that responsibility to the public.
Miss,
But I just don't want us to all right, I'm not say no more.
But member for Georgetown Central.
Can we clarify, to you, Mr. Chair, that all the cable providers now are carrying CIGTV?
We've dealt with this before, but all except Flow, who have now agreed to do so.
And are we saying then, because we need it to be disseminated, as a result we are circumventing their requirement to do the
Mr. Chairman, we've just been through all of this. I don't know if the member stepped out.
Mr. Chair, I couldn't have stepped out when the question was just asked. My colleague highlighted their requirement to create local content. Has the government agreed for them to meet their requirement to accept CIGTV, who creates local content, as meeting their requirement? Or do they still have to make their own content as well as they're carrying CIGTV is the question.
Mr. Chairman, we've just been through that. The question was asked and the question was answered.
If I may help, Mr. Chairman, they have committed to provide us with because I asked if it was the agreements have been renegotiated, and they are committed to providing that for us so that we can see what percentage of it. Basically, that's what I'm hoping anyhow. But the fact is that those licenses were agreed upon on the basis that part of their responsibility, there were a number of responsibilities built out within a certain amount of time and what have you. And most may not understand the meaning of build out, but we do. And then one specific provision was that they had to provide local content. So that's an obligation by license and law. And there were certain hours attached to it, as I recall, or days or whatever, the amount of local content. CIGTV does not make that up in its entirety. Whilst they do not make that up, there is CIGTV does not make that entire provision whole. Well, what about the other side of it? And more importantly, with regards to the Premier saying we're asking them to provide a dissemination service, and I hear him and hold his view on that. But the position I want to reach is, one, what if we have allowed them partial out of their obligation and responsibility under that provision for the content? What percentage of that more needs to be done? But more importantly, why aren't we getting that entire thing out to the general public? Because when that CIGTV was born, if I may, was to only broadcast this legislature proceedings. We expanded it. At the time, I didn't support it because it was not going to get out to everybody. You had to subscribe to a subscriber. You had to be a subscriber to one of the providers to do it. And my question remains, we have not migrated past that. It remains the same for the last 8 years. When are we getting there? That's what I'm concerned about. I know we discussed it, but it is, Mr. Chairman, it is it is imperative that we come back. And in the case of the Premier situation, where we have a responsibility to disseminate information, or we want to do it, whichever, then we need it to everybody.
Can we let him answer that question for you now?
Mr. Chairman, I believe I can provide a bit of clarity. I think what many of the members are referring to is a license obligation for cable TV and over-the-air broadcasters to provide local content. What was not clear in the license was what we meant by the term local content. Is this a whole TV station, or is this just a webcam pointing out your window? So what we've done is engage the industry to further define what local content means. With regards to the concept of public service broadcasting was raised, we've looked at several models for public service broadcasting, and CIG 20 would play a role in public service broadcasting. We've looked at the BBC, we looked at the Canadian model, we've looked at some of the things that the US has done with the PBS, public service broadcasting arrangements that they've made. And what we've come up with is a definition of what we mean by local content, which is local news, weather, sports, community events, and government information. Based on that list, government information would only be one part of 5 to define local content. Providers would still have to figure out how they're going to provide the other 4. And I hope that provides some context within which SIG TV would then play a role in meeting that content, local content obligation.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, no, I get it. Thanks for explaining it. Because that means 20% of their thing, you name 5, and CIG TV is 1. CIG TV is only providing 20% of it. There is 80% that needs to be provided free on air.
Member for Newlands. I think we need to close the debate on this.
I'll be quick. I'm trying to remember my question.
Last question.
It's been so long. I'm looking at, in the description here, provision of following services to other government agencies, advertising/marketing products and services. I'm assuming the Legislative Assembly is one of those agencies. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the member to repeat the question? We're struggling here a bit.
I think he was asking, Premier, not to second guess, but whether included in this were marketing product and services to the Legislative Assembly?
Yeah, and by saying that, all members as well. That's what I'm trying to find out. I'll be quick. Are these services extended to members of the Legislative Assembly?
Mr. Chairman, the short answer to the question would be no. This is a specific appropriation focused on supporting the development and implementation of the government's strategic communication goals and objectives. The government is distinct from the Parliament. So this is a specific project that this money is being voted for. Yeah, it is separation of powers. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just a quick follow, because what I was asking is, I think it would be beneficial to all members, not just the opposition. We don't have any sort of operating budget to work from other than constituents' allowance. But my important events and so on, especially now that we're trying to improve the level of participatory democracy and we have single-member constituencies, that maybe there's some consideration, and this will go into my SPS debate. Obviously, I'm not going to drag it out here, but to allow all members to benefit from some of these services, because they're getting quite good and adept at providing them. So it makes sense that we all support our government service and use it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any objection to that at all, but it's quite distinct from the government strategic policy. Yeah.
All those in favor
Mr.
of...
Chair, Mr. Chair,
one last.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The CEO, I think Mr. Leon, or if I pronounce his name wrong, he said that there's a public consultation with the stakeholders right now as to identify what local content is. Can he give a timeline as to when that conclusion of what local content will be? Because I find it a bit of a conflict of interest asking the industry what local content is, because I come from media and they're going to give you something that is the cheapest of cost to them in respect to their obligations to a license that we've already written the commitment for. So like he highlighted, a little webcam like this and somebody looking in front of it may be considered local content. And if we're depending on them for the answer for that, we may not get the best product in the world that is deserving of the people. So one, why ask the industry as opposed to outside advisors who are not conflicted in their answers? And secondly, when will that be concluded so the people can know their commitment to local content, so we can know, we don't have to keep on asking the question in Parliament, because we've been dealing with this now for over 5 years.
Premier.
Mr. Chairman, the answer to the first question was July. The answer to the second question is the law specifically requires consultation with the industry.
All those in favor of CBO 17, information services provided to other government agencies for $400,000, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Members of the committee, I might be able to give a little bit of help here as well in terms of framing your questions. When you look on each of these appropriation requests, there is a description of what that appropriation should be about. But right below that is a very clear statement as to the reason for the appropriation. And that should give you the information you need as to what this is all about. So I would just invite you as we go forward, because we're getting a lot of questions being asked about the general description of it, rather than what the specifics are with regard to the particular and reasons for the appropriation. So I ask you to keep your mind on that and focus on the reason. Pardon? No, I understand. I want you to know and solicit. Next.
That's the purpose of this process.
Yeah.
You might like the outcome, but the process is necessary.
CBO 20, advice and assistance to the Premier and administration of the Premier's office, $505,450. And if you look at the bottom of that table, it tells you what it is we're asking for. Other questions?
Just a quick question. Of the a little over $500,000, what's the breakdown between legal advice versus the 60-year celebration? Ballparkish.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I got it. Non-personnel costs for which is what this is for the Celebrate Cayman campaign, is $305,450 and $200,000 for legal advice, not related to Celebrate Cayman.
Mr. Chair, I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate all the persons who've been involved in the 60-year celebrations. They've done an amazing job over the time, particularly those who headed up Mr. Alfonso Wright. I want to congratulate the Premier for initiating this celebration organization. I think the country really appreciated it, and on behalf of my constituents, we want to thank the government.
All those in favor of CBO 20, advice and assistance to the Premier and administration of the Premier's office, $505,450, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Turn now to page 6. URC 8, monitoring and controlling of URC 8, monitoring and controlling of petroleum products, storage and handling for $1,300,000.
Mr. Chair, I have a few.
Member for Northside.
Yeah. I saw an article on the petroleum ones here. There's an article in the news quite recently that the petroleum people are going to do some kind of survey to make sure that when I go to the pump, I'll know whether I'm getting 70 or 80 fuel. When can we expect some regulation that goes towards reducing the price of fuel?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Duke Monroe, Chief Fuels Inspector and Director of Fuels Market. For the question that was raised by the Honorable Member in terms of a timing for the regulation of fuel prices, I beg clarification on that in terms of what is expected, because the regulation of prices can take many forms. As I would have mentioned, we are looking at driving competition as against price control.
That answer not working with me no more. I heard that plenty of time, and every time I go to the pump, this driving of competition, the price has gone up. There's only been one other provider introduced, and while the publicity surrounding the introduction of that additional provider for fuels, particularly gasoline and diesel, was being promoted, there were numbers about it was going to be $2 less and $1.50 less a gallon and all that. And as soon as they got in here and they realized that they could make money by just being 20% below what exists. Let's deal with the first issue first, and then I'll get back to this. Why are we spending money through off-reg to identify on the gas pumps or out in the yard for the gas pumps on some kind of sign what is a 50 or what is an 80% fuel, octane?
Through the chair to the member, to the honorable member, sorry. We have been having issues with misfueling, and it is a real problem out there with persons picking up nozzles, especially at the self-serve gas stations, and putting fuel in the vehicle that is the wrong fuel. And oftentimes the first place they stop for recourse on that is off-reg, because they believe that that information should be more clear and consistent across all service stations. So it is a real problem that we have faced. It's not a massive problem, but it's one that we can fix quite easily. Hence the reason we've decided to address this.
All the pumps have signs on them now. They even have different colors. How are you going to? What is your recommendation that is going to improve that? And how serious really? If you put 50 and you should have 8 enough. If you cross it up with diesel, but that's a separate color too. That's yellow. So how do you envisage improving the signage for that?
So through the chair, thank you for the question. How the plan is to have gasoline of a specific grade be of one color at any facility. Currently the situation is Sol has different colors for 87 grade, which we commonly call regular. The premium grade, a different color, and diesel has a different color. In the case of Rubis and Refuel, they have a different and distinct color for their regular, premium, and diesel. What we're seeking to do is to ensure that when you show up at a gas station and you pick up a red nozzle, red means it's regular grade gasoline. It's of a certain minimum specification and quality. So that eliminates that problem that their branding issues different colors of nozzle, because currently there are different colors, as I mentioned earlier, at all of the different network.
Okay. To get back to my second question now, since the word regulation seems to be the confusing thing for pricing, when is the fuel sector of reg likely to recommend control of prices for fuel in the Cayman Islands?
Through the chair, to the honorable member, we have a number of options that we have to go through to get to the last option of price control. We are all aware that we are pushing the basis that Cayman is free enterprise. We operate a free enterprise system, so there is no appetite, nor has there been any policy direction to move to price controls to dictate to the suppliers and the retailers what a gallon of regular premium or diesel will be. We are in the process, as I mentioned at the last Finance Committee, of seeking assistance to go through the market study to decide how the market needs to be broken up, because the regular and premium gasoline market has its uniqueness. The diesel has its uniqueness. We have a marine market out there. We have aviation market. We have CUC market. When we speak of regulation of the market, we are focusing on just the motoring fuels. However, we cannot focus on that market in isolation, because the oil companies are importing, as you might notice, one set of tanks. Fuel from those tanks go into various different markets. So we need to define those markets. And as I mentioned, we were at the place of commencing that work, at the beginning of this year. We've had some internal setbacks. We are moving forward. We're enlisting support to move beyond that so that we can have that comprehensive work done. So within 6 months, once we get past our internal issues, within 6 months, we will be coming back to government with some firm recommendations in terms of how we propose to sequentially go through the regulation of these markets to achieve the desirable outcomes.
So by July this year, you hope to be able to tell the government how you're going to do it. When do you expect to have it done?
Through the chair, that will depend on the various approaches we are proposing to take in terms of.
We're not going to the moon, you know. We want to control the price of gas. But how come you don't have this problem controlling the price of water, electricity, telephone?
Through the chair, to the honorable member, because those markets, by virtue of the nature of those markets are monopolistic markets in the fuel sector. We have, well, at the time the law came into being, those were duopolistic markets. That has since changed with the entry of the refuels, and on the LPG side too, because as you may notice, those markets have been deemed, those players have been deemed dominant 2 years back. The market has been changing, and we've been facilitating those changes, so that will require us to sit down and go through. And I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you. No problem.
Member for Bodentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed the original approved budget for 2019 was $150,000. This is now coming back for an additional $1.3 million, more than 10 times what was originally approved. And the question I'm trying to understand is, what is driving this additional $1.3 million? Is this staff costs? I mean, what was the genesis of that number? What are we paying for? What are we buying?
Through the chair, to the honorable member, the change in appropriation is as a result of the fuel funding mechanism not being in place for OFREC. So the increase represents the total operational cost of OFREC's regulatory effort in that sector. The $150,000 appropriation you would have seen would have been the output costs associated with work we do in the fuel sector on behalf of government, with the anticipation that we were going to create a revenue mechanism to fund OFREC. Apart from the $150,000 you're seeing there, OFREC has no other revenue source to fund its work. And this is both on the compliance side, the work we do to ensure the companies are safe, the inspections we do, the planning, application, consultation to ensure fuel sites are up to speed. The Fuel Standards Committee, all of this work is now part of, is now going to be covered by this.
So I'm clear. You guys anticipated to make money from the fuel companies, similar to what the telephone companies do, to cover your costs. And you're saying that the money you expected to get from the fuel companies to cover your costs, you didn't get any money from the fuel companies to cover your costs. So now we're taking money from the public purse to cover your costs.
Well, that is a policy decision of the government, because I want you to think about how ironic this would be. If we created OFREC for the purpose, the principal purpose, not the sole purpose, the principal purpose of controlling the cost of fuels. I mean, we got the other utilities in as well. How ironic it would be if in order to do that, we had to increase what government receives per gallon from the fuel companies, because they're going to pass that on to the consumers. So we took a policy decision, and we had a great debate with the folks at OFREC. We are not going to do anything to increase the cost, for government to increase the cost of fuel to the consumer. So to fund OFREC, the money has to come from somewhere else. But if we said instead, as I think their proposal, I remember what the number was, let's say it was 5 cents a gallon, the government charged an additional 5 cents a gallon, that's going to increase the cost, which runs completely counter to the whole objective of OFREC in the first place. So, but the money to operate OFREC has to come from somewhere. We're just trying to avoid it coming directly from the consumer, because we would have defeated at least in the first instance the whole one of the principal objectives of OFREC, which is to lower the price of fuel to the consumer.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Premier. Well, the issue is then, if we are paying for something where the objective is to lower the cost, and the cost isn't going down, it means in essence we're paying for nothing. So then the real question then is, what's the use? At this point, we might as well look at closing it down if it's not, I mean, barring the quality type inspections. This is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money, but let me try to provide some perspective. OFREC's management regulation of the fuel sector is only one part of what it does, right? So it manages the utilities, telecommunication, and water. So this money doesn't relate purely to the core fuel aspect of it. Monitoring and controlling of petroleum products, storage and handling. If you see the description below, it says administration of the petroleum handling and storage law, including inspection of fuel storage terminals, advising on the safe handling of hazardous substances, etc., etc. But it's not. There's bound to be administrative overlap and costs and all of those things wrapped up in it. But it is a significant sum of money, and I'm not trying to downplay that. And OFREC, let me be as euphemistic as I can, has had some real teething issues, settling settling in into the creation of this new utilities regulator. And we are still working through a lot of them. There is a new CEO coming on board shortly. Hopefully, that will help to start to get things back properly on the rails. But I know certainly the member from East End believes, unless he's changed his view, has always believed that we did need a utility regulator. As I say, we've had significant teething problems. We're all hopeful that the worst is behind us in that regard, and that we'll have a better handle and grip on the kind of numbers that we're looking at in terms of overall costs and better management and vision for the entity overall.
You mentioned a new CEO. I understand that the new CEO is a non-Caymanian, and I want to ask you to look carefully at the requisite qualifications and experience, if it's the same individual that I think it is.
Well, the way the law works is the hiring is and stuff. I do have a role as premier under the Public Authorities Law, right? So, but they go through the development of the job description, advertising, interviewing, deciding, shortlisting, deciding on who there is. Then, what the word is now, making sure that what is what is submitted as qualifications, formal qualifications, are real in this world where there's so much fake or fakeness, whatever the word is. They've done all of that, and they've provided that information to me with essentially their certificate that they are satisfied that the man is who he says he is and that he has the qualifications he says he is. I am not a technical expert in this. I have to go on the basis of the information I have, the advice I have, and I have indicated just, I think yesterday or the day before I believe it was, that I am satisfied. So that's the extent of my involvement in it.
Mr. Chairman.
I did mine too.
You have a question, sir?
If I may.
Please go.
A question? E question? E question, what I mean, one?
I'm going to limit your time, sir.
Okay. You got to limit my time? Okay. Mr. Chairman, let me make it very clear to the Premier and this country and this committee and all that hears me. I have always supported a regulatory body that includes all disciplines on utilities. Always did. Tried doing it when I was minister. Financial resources was not available for me to get Mr. Hay from Jamaica to head it up and do it for me. A man I highly respect and revere for his capabilities. I have quite a few questions. What I can say first, though, was I support the concept of utility regulatory umbrella. This one not working yet. And I don't know how much gripe water we got have put on them teeth that are cutting. But we need gripe water now. Okay? Mr. Chairman, this concept that we cannot stifle competition is the biggest piece of BS I've ever heard. This is an essential commodity that affects everybody, just like electricity, just like water, and we got price controls on them. We need to stop it now. There are different ways of applying price control. I stood on this floor and recommended one. We want CIF Grand Cayman cost. Then we're going to put on a certain amount for the wholesalers that they got to sell it to by app. Then the retailers, a certain amount on top of that. That is price control of a commodity. And it needs to be done now, pronto. So I don't want to hear this again about you stifling competition. Because let me, Mr. Chairman, through you to my good friend, the Premier. Each day we go by, we allow this off-reg, allow those wholesalers to buy up the retail supermarket. You cannot control them like that. They just bought another one. And off-reg knows about it. The objective of the wholesalers in this country was LCCL in the 60s because no one else was providing it. Now they are retailing. They are leasing gas stations and releasing them, subleasing them, without any clearance from off-reg. Is this right? And if off-reg sit down and do nothing? Do absolutely nothing? I understand that my technical capabilities is more than the Premier's in that arena. But he's a lawyer too. He got plenty more of that than me. So he is proficient out there. But when authorities deliberately abuse their ministers and give them poor advice, it is time to shut it down. Just because it would be like the Attorney General giving me bad advice because I don't know anything about law. Mr. Chairman, you know...
Question, sir?
Question is more than question on this off-reg that needs to be addressed. Because the Premier is from pillar to post all over Europe and all kind of things, and poor him, he don't even know what's happening until he get back here and he got to read it in his house with the papers pile up on top of him. I'm not going to sit here and turn a blind eye to it when I know better. I'm not going to do that, Mr. Chairman, because this country's future is at stake when it comes to commodities. Basic, essential commodities that affects every human being in this country, and it needs to stop now. And I implore I'm not going to ask questions. I implore the Premier to find someone technical from, particularly in Houston, in Texas. Find someone technical, independent, pay them the price, and get an audit of that off-reg and do what is necessary to bring it in line. The country, the entire country is going to be affected by it, and is being affected by it. You don't have to send out and ask the public what color the hoses on on the gas station should be. Send and tell the people exactly what you want it to be based on industrial standard. Bam, done. It's ridiculous.
Mr. Chairman, I hear and I know the members' passion about this particular issue. Let me say this. OFREG is not a department of the government. It's not in my ministry. OFREG is a statutorily established entity whose purpose is regulation, whose principal purpose is regulation. It is run by a board of directors which is quite independent of the ministry and the government and the government as a whole, and the elected government as a whole, and it has its own management team and structure. It is bound to take sort of general direction and directives from the cabinet, but we are in no way involved in the regulation of the in the regulatory matters that they deal with. I said earlier that there is a new CEO who will imminently take over. We have concerns about the operations of OFREG. I've not acknowledged them, not just today, but before. And a lot of it has been the subject of press coverage and Auditor General's observations and so forth. So no one is trying to pretend that all is well. But I do believe that we can't go and, or not us, but the board, hire a new CEO, and before he even takes post, we'd head off on some other course and in some other direction. We've got to let him come, take over, give him a chance to make a proper assessment, give us a report about the way he thinks things should be going, what needs to be done, and the government can then take some decisions based on that. I am many things, but impulsive I'm not. I don't believe in making decisions because I feel so in my gut. I need objective analysis, assessment, and evidence to be able to make a decision like shut it down.
Mr. Chairman, God forbid if I want the Premier to get proper advice on what needs to be done going forward. For instance, Mr. Chairman, a year ago, and since then, we were told they were going to make a recommendation to the ministry on this thing how we can go forward with price control. It's not gone to the minister yet. Now they're saying another 6 months.
Member for Northside. Then I'm going to put it to the vote.
I wonder if he could find out from OFREG what is the actual cost of this study to determine what color the nozzles should be.
Mr. Chairman, there's cost in everything. I mean, because the time you spend doing something here is time you couldn't spend somewhere else, but there's no fee attached to this. The consultation is being conducted in accordance with obligations under the law to consult industry about these kinds of changes.
All those in favor of URC 8, monitoring and controlling of petroleum products, storage and handling, $1,300,000. Please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no? Okay. Madam Clerk, can we call for a division, please?
Just that's why I sent out the message. People keep shitting around leaving. We got by one. Captain here. We got it by one. Just barely. Who?
I know. Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
We call for they call for a division, sir. So we're taking a division.
Honorable Alden McLaughlin.
Aye.
Honorable Moses Colonel. Honorable Juliana O'Connor Connolly.
Aye.
Honorable Dwayne Seymour.
Aye.
Honorable Joseph Hugh.
That was an easy aye.
Honorable Tara Rivers.
Aye.
Honorable Makifa Bush. Honorable Bernie Bush.
No.
Captain Eugenie Banks.
Mr. Chair, he wasn't in his chair when the call for the vote was here.
Miss Barbara Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. David White.
Aye.
Mr. Austin Harris. Honorable Ezra Miller.
No.
Mr. Alva Saku.
No.
Mr. Kenneth Bryan.
No.
Mr. Anthony Eden.
No.
Mr. Christopher Saunders.
No.
Mr. Arden McLean.
No.
The results of the division are 7 ayes, 7 noes, and 4 absentees. In accordance with the standing orders, as chair of the committee, it befalls me to break the tie, and accordingly I declare my vote as an aye. Accordingly, it is carried. OE 113, administrative and advisory support to the members of the Legislative Assembly, $219,550. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Member for Georgetown Central.
I just have 2 simple questions for the minister. Can you just say what the additional staff, how many additional staff there was, and for what positions?
We're speaking of OE 15.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is really incorrectly characterized here as constituency office, political staff within the office of the Premier. This money is the Celebrate Cayman project team. There's nobody else. So who are, for the record, who are Mr. Alfonso Wright and Ms. Marzita Borden?
All those in favor of OE 113, administrative and advisory support to the members of the Legislative Assembly for $219,550, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Ayes have it. EI 36, Cabinet Office, $60,000. Any questions? All those in favor of EI 36, Cabinet Office, $60,000, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. We turn now to page 9. Output groups to be purchased by the Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. CAY2, Children and Youth Services Foundation, $922,000. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Through you, do these funds also fall for the Bonaventure home?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if the member will read the bottom of the description in the box there.
Yes, that's
okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask if it's a common practice to have directors who are publicly declared atheists? We've had the speaker speak about our Human Rights Commission atheists earlier today, and we also have the director for the Bonaventure home who was also declared atheist. And is that a common practice to hire persons in charge of our children who are atheists?
Mr. Chairman, the individual being spoken about has been there a long, long time. I came and found him, but I'll ask the chief officer to address that.
Can I ask you for you to state your name and your position for the record?
Teresa Chiniki, Chief Officer with the Ministry of Community Affairs. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the process of hiring is done through the board that have oversight of the Keys Foundation. I don't think that one of the questions or one of the criteria that they look for really is related to the individual's religious belief or the lack thereof. With that said, to date, there have been no indication that that particular individual's belief has impacted his operations or ability to do his job.
Mr. Chair, through you, and allow me, please, with your indulgence, to give you a little preamble. The chief officer has said the ability of him being atheist may not have an effect on that. Does that mean that he would not be able to tell his employees they're not allowed to pray at work?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is no indication that he has given any instructions of that nature, to my knowledge.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I have an employee who could give you evidence, would there be willing to be any action taken as a result?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the information will be welcome, and I will be happy to also provide that information to the chair of the Keys Foundation.
Last question. Is there any criteria or limitations to persons in those types of positions and their public profile, particularly their social media profiles? Is there any restrictions of how they should show their character or their personal beliefs? Are they obligated to hold a certain standard? For example, the fact that he's atheist, to keep it to himself. Is he obligated by the hiring process to keep his own religious beliefs because of the position that he have private?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to my knowledge, the board does provide guidance in terms of what is placed in the media or on their public sites. At this point, I think that the board is in the process of reviewing some of their HR policies and looking at some of the guidelines for their staff. That is the point that you're making is something that I'm more than happy to bring to the chair of the board and ask that they take into consideration if they have not done so already.
Mr. Chairman.
Member from Modern Town West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Through you. I noticed it says the reason for the appropriation change is to support an increased number of residents placed in care at Bonaventure and Francis Borden homes. Can you just give me a rough idea in terms of what that number is, in terms of the increased amount? What was the original budgeted amount and what the amount is now? Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have that detail here, but we can get it. I don't think we can get it this evening, but we can get it. It's clear we'll be back in Finance Committee on Monday, so...
No, that's fine. And the reason why I asked the question, just to kind of give an idea, the backdrop for the question, so as you prepare to answer, it may help. The last time I remember doing the budget, it had worked out to well over $100,000 per child in Bonaventure. And what I'm trying to figure out now, if we reach economies of scale or diseconomies of scale with regards to the per choice, because I mean, I think it was like about 150,000 per child when we looked at it the last time, thereabouts. And I'm trying to figure out now if that 150,000 per child has either gone up or has gone less, because it is a lot of money, and then it would naturally beg the question, what exactly are we getting for $150,000 per child when it works out like that? So that is really what it is I'm trying to determine. So as you're putting together the answer, just bear in mind that's what it is I'm looking for. Thanks.
We're trying to spend the money now so we don't have to spend it later, keeping them in prison and not having the benefit of their contribution to the society.
Mr. Premier, I totally agree with you. That's the reason why.
Long we bear that in mind.
No. I agree, because a prisoner is only $75,000 a year, so we're trying to see what we're getting for $150,000. That's what we're trying to find out.
All those in favor of CAY2, Children and Youth Services Foundation, for $922,000, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. EI 54, Ministry of Community Affairs, $450,000. Any questions? Member for Northside.
Is this the building that is beside the Francis Borden Girls' Home?
No, this is a facility in Northwood.
Oh, okay.
I think we talked about this before, but we have a facility on Maple Road for disabled persons, and the situation we have is that, I mean, many people stay there for their life, quite frankly. They've aged out, so we are in this very bad position of having minors and adults in the same facility. So this property was purchased by the former minister, Osborne Borden, well, through his auspices, during the last administration. But as is often, far too often the case within the government system, the initial indications of what the costs were going to be to turn it into a suitable facility, the initial costs are much lower than what is now, once it's been tendered and all that sort of stuff that we know. Because you have to put in amenities for persons who are disabled. So that's why we have this significantly increased amount. I looked long and hard at this, and quarreled about it, as the chief knows. But in the end, yeah. It does. I wondered at times whether or not we couldn't build a brand new place, you know. So, but haven't seen what was the estimates provided by Public Works, as well as what people are prepared to build it for. This is where we're at. So, all that sort of stuff, because yeah.
If there are no further questions, all those in favor of EI 54, Ministry of Community Affairs, for $450,000, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Members of the committee, that concludes the appropriations to the Premier.
No, sir. No, sir, Mr. Chairman. There's one more. The new ministry, at the very end. Thank you, Mr. Eason. 6 o'clock.
What? Where's that? Where may I find that, sir?
It's the very last page, sir. Page 38.
Oh, page. Okay, my apologies. Okay, ITI 1, International Engagement and Representation of the Cayman Islands, $1,700,000. Are there any questions?
Yeah, exactly. What is the breakdown of that 1.7 million? Is it personnel driven? And if that's the case, how many FTEs are we looking at? Personnel, like employees, what's the size of that ministry?
Mr. Chairman, this relates to both personnel and the setup costs of the office for the first year. I should add, in interest of transparency, that this does not include the cost of establishing the office in Asia. That's not in this. So why about it? Ask me when I bring that. But we gave you $1.7 million.
There's a breakdown between staff costs and non-staff costs, and roughly the number of employees.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask the CFO to go through that personnel thing, because he's going to have to tell me and I tell you.
Vinton Chinsey, Chief Financial Officer. There are 13 FTEs. Not all come on board at the same time. I'll give you the breakdown in a minute.
You're looking to pick now?
Mr. Chair, 658 is personnel cost. 658 is personnel, yeah.
And it covers like one, like, can you give me the breakdown, like one chief officer, 2 deputies? Can you give me that breakdown, please?
Okay, sir, one moment. Includes a chief officer, deputy chief officer. One, yes, sir. Personal assistant, 3 policy advisors, hold on, and 3 desk officers. In the FTE count, it's actually 11, not 13. I mistakenly included the head of the Asia office proposed, and the other one.
I have 2 more. You said 13, so now you dropped to 11.
Yeah.
But you only give me 9 positions so far. I'm trying to figure out the other 2.
Accounts officer and financial manager.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the size of this 11 FTEs in this new ministry, how does that compare to the other ministries within government?
Smaller than most.
Well, Mr. Chairman, smaller than most at this stage, but this is, and all of these won't come on board immediately. Anyhow, it will take time and wrap it up. This, I think, over time, I'll be gone, but over time, this, I think, will become one of the most important ministries, especially with what I'm seeing happening out there now, one of the most important ministries in government.
What we just want to make sure, I guarantee you, Mr. Premier, you don't have to sell this ministry. I think this is
I'm not trying to sell it, I'm
needed.
just saying
No,
it's going to get
I'm
bigger.
just saying, I know we all onboarded it. What we're just trying to make sure from an administrative standpoint that unlike some ministries that have created some superstructures, that this one doesn't follow the same path where it has become really very big very quickly without the associated. Thanks very much for the breakdown.
Mr. Chairman.
All those in favor? Oh,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Member from Newlands? No.
What is my understanding of who's the new ministers that are going to be in charge of this ministry now that I see it's a new ministry?
Me.
So you could be a new. Okay.
I am hopeful if we ever get the constitutional changes that we've kind of sort of agreed on, that there would be another minister that could take some of the other things. But with the state of the UK government, I have no certainty that anything like that is going to happen.
There may not be a UK government.
Or there will be. It just might not be one amenable to what we want.
Any other questions? All those in favor of ITI-1, International Engagement and Representation of the Cayman Islands, $1,700,000, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Premier?
There are, I think, 8 minutes left before the hour of 6.
Well?
No, they've corrected the time. It's on time with my watch now. So I would just bring it to your attention, sir, that I will need to leave as I'm hosting a thank you reception stroke party for those who helped, for everybody who helped with the royal visit last week. So I would ask. No, we had a lot of help. I mean, a lot. Not only the police in particular. I mean, just did an incredible job. So we try.
Mr. Chairman, may I have an intervention, please?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to finish my application to you, sir. That be shut down at 6.
I had it, Premier, I had it in my mind, and I knew that we need to shut down at 6 o'clock. So, members of the committee, unless you indicate to me that you're prepared to give our Minister of Education a complete pass and support her appropriations, we will take the break here. We will
Mr.
conclude.
Chairman, before you do, sir.
Yes, sir.
May I respectfully bring to your attention the rules of committee concerning votes and tied votes in particular that needs to necessarily maintain the status quo. The chairman, in his casting vote, cannot vote, it has no choice but to vote in a particular way. I am merely bringing it to you that it would be for consideration, for your consideration to research and do return to this committee, because I need to bring it to your attention before the committee suspends. And I would no, but you can't recommit it with it cannot be recommitted with members that weren't here. That's another thing. So if we don't, if green, so I would respectfully, but no, you can't do that. No, you can't. No. Well, the government, to increase it, has to get the proper authorization from cabinet. But I was trying to do this for the benefit of the chairman, but of course you and that Kimon Brack obstructionist, or my good friend from Kimon Brack East.
Mr. Chairman, I take deference to that because that's imputing improper motives to a sitting member of the House. Although I'm sitting in the chair that made the same objection before, I am a sitting member.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was only talking about her being an obstructionist to me, not to everybody else. But, Mr. Chairman, I would beg that you research that for future references if
Thank you, sir.
Eh?
Members of the committee, this will conclude our proceedings for the day. I take the opportunity to wish you all a very enjoyable weekend. We will recommence with Finance Committee on Monday morning at 9:30, and I will be here sharp to commence at 9:30, please. So let's try and be here on time. Thank you all very much.